Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Brewers Spotlight. I'm your host, Ed, and today I have on Bill. Bill, please introduce yourself to the group here.
Hey everybody, my name is Bill Goetz. I'm a member of the Brewers of South Suburbia, longtime member, I would say.
There we go. How
Yeah.
long have you been a member of Boss?
Oh, so I was looking, trying to find a proof. I've definitely been in since 2012 or before. My memory gets foggy. But I do remember some of my first meetings. And if we can figure out the day that Dave Personaire hosted meeting in his basement, the Mead meeting. That was my first meeting, and that was kind of like a legendary, well, in my opinion, a legendary meeting for Boss. It was one of the last meetings we held at somebody's houses, as I recall, except for Brandon. Brandon had a meeting at his house as well shortly after that. But the Mead meeting was very memorable because Meads are, well, I wasn't ready for that. I was drinking Line and Kugels. I thought it was like pretty crafty at that time. So walking into a Mead meeting was like pretty eye-opening and memorable. So that was my first meeting. Whatever year that was, that's about when I first started with Boss.
So whatever year that was, but at least 10 years now. So a decade here in the club. How long have you been brewing? Were you brewing long before that, or?
No, I think I was doing research, just trying to remember. I don't take very good notes, I guess. About 2009, I think I saw my first proof or evidence in my photos and Facebook that was starting to brew. I'd brewed a couple batches I saw about 2009, I'd say.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So you brewed a year or two on your own before you ended up finding Boss. So that 2009 era, Bill, what was his first beer? What did that look like? Do you remember?
Yes, actually, now that you're asking, I do, and I should have had this prop ready to go, but I went to a homebrew shop in it's Wanamaker's or something like that. Wanamaker's? No, anyway, Winemakers. Yes, it's not Wanamaker's. That's a different store. Winemakers up in, I forget, like Elmhurst or something. And I asked the guy for like a recipe, like I said, a hoppy red, and I got the book Brewing Classic Styles, which I should have here for a prop because it's like where a lot of us guys who brew in my era, that's where we started. And he pointed to a recipe, a West Coast Blaster, I think it was called. Gosh, I wish I could have grabbed that book. But yeah, that's the first beer I brewed. I did an extract version, and it was pretty darn good. And I was hooked.
All right. So the first beer was a success, and it was a hoppy beer. Go figure.
Pretty happy. Well, for
Yeah.
the time, yeah. I probably didn't know how many mistakes I made along the way, but I was like really happy with the beer. So it was probably not very good compared to like the beers we get these days or the beer you can make now, but I liked it. And so I kept going. I went back to the second batch. I don't remember what the second batch was, but
So yeah, that's what I was going to lead into was that first beer was a hoppy beer, but that's not really your favorite style to brew anymore. You're much more of a lager guy, are you not now?
yeah, for sure. I think like I kind of goes back to number two. One of your questions earlier was like, does my home brewery have a name? And I early on decided to call my brewery Billy Goetz Brewing because my whole life, my name is Bill Goetz, Billy Goetz when I was a kid. But the reason maybe one of the reasons I was first drawn to lager beer was because I got this idea, like behind me, this beer in Germany, it's called a Bock beer, is traditionally associated with rams.
The ram, that's right.
Or like I maybe mistranslated to billy goats. And I've like when people mispronounce my name, it's always Billy Goats, or when I was a kid, at least when I was Billy. So I was Billy Goats all growing up. So I kind of latched onto this idea of it'd be kind of cool to make a Billy Goats beer, a Billy Goat beer, like um, like the famous German ones, or this guy behind me. And so I said, well, I want to check out this Bach recipe. And like, I don't know how I stumbled on making a good one, but again, the first recipe came out of Brewing Classic Styles. And the second recipe, which is pretty much the one I still brew, comes out of like one of Gordon Strong's book. I think it's Modern Homebrew Recipes or Brewing Better Beer. And for some reason, like that beer that I make it on a regular basis, and it does really well. And I'm not really sure why that beer and not other beers that I make do, pretty darn well. But also, I kind of like drinking German lager beer. So I just started looking into more being a kind of a more serious lager brewer than ales. I like American hoppy beer like IPAs and APAs, but like for those, I feel when I make 5 gallons of it, it's hard to drink 5 gallons by myself, or even if I share a couple before it goes like kind of south. Whereas lager beer is pretty stable if you treat it right, and so I can have it in the keezer for months, and it only gets better uh, until it's finished. Then it gets better and it's better, and right when it's like at its pinnacle, you're out. The beer's gone. So that's kind of a practical consideration of one of the reasons why I brew lager. But I really like some of the traditional German styles, like Helles. I wish I could make I haven't made a Helles that is just knockout, like awesome, up to my standards of what I think a great German Helles can be. So that's always a goal. It's probably always a beer that I'll try to be chasing after to make a great one. So yeah, long story, but German lagers is my main interest.
All right. So the Billy Goetz beer is the brewery name. You explained where that came from. We talked about lager beer in general, the German lagers, and why you like to drink them the way you do. That's cool. Have you thought about anything that you haven't brewed yet, where you're like, oh, I want to do that someday, but maybe not right now, or something the opposite, even where you're like, I'm never going to touch a style like that. That's just not my thing at all.
So I have a lot of respect for traditional recipe or traditional kind of like old school styles, and I wish I was better at Belgian beers. So I probably would like to, if I ever wanted to branch out, it would be awesome to know enough about Belgian beers to make a good, Trappist style, or even a single something that is just a good Belgian beer. So that's something I would want to see myself doing eventually. I like English style beers as well. When I just being at the picnic this weekend, I was reminded, like, oh, why haven't I tried to do a brown ale like Jim Todd's? Like, why haven't I done that in like 5 years? I should try to get out of my mold of just doing the same 5 beers over and over. Then on the other hand, it's good to like repeat the same recipe and try to make it better each time. A beer style that I would not want to probably ever see myself doing is some of these, and I hate to be like, that thing where like you like what you like, and then you see people gravitate towards things you think are like trendy or a fad or just BS. Like if you ever see me come with a pastry stout or a pastry beer, like a cheesecake porter or a cheesecake pilsner or something stupid like that, then I've lost my mind, because I have no interest in having anything like that in my kegs. So I think it's silly. If you like that kind of thing, that's fine. But when I go to a brewery and they have like key lime pie, I don't know, what's like Kolsch or something, it's like, come on, just give me a beer, But I'm an old guy, so that's maybe my hang up. I like the beer flavored beers,
Hey, I think everything's got its place at the end of the day. Whatever's going to bring you into the hobby and keep you active.
If that's what you like, go for it. Actually, I did brew it like a milkshake kind of.
And that's where I thought you were going. Was you were going to say I brewed a milkshake, or like milkshake, but really, so you brewed a milkshake
for a party.
What was that like?
Gosh, it was expensive. I'll tell you that much.
So this hops, a lot of vanilla,
for a lot of junk in that keg. It's so expensive when you're covering up all the hops with all this stuff. I made it for a party, so I wasn't like, like I've been saying, I like to keep my beer for home is like stuff that can sit in the keg for a while. This was for a one-shot deal, and it was popular amongst other people who don't know much about brewing or beer. And that's not to say that that style of beer doesn't have a place amongst people who do love beer. It's just not my style typically, and so I just went for it, and it was fine. I have not repeated that recipe, but it was fun to do and fun to share with people.
Like good experience, as it were.
Yeah.
So you got a favorite piece of gear or tool in the arsenal when it comes to brewing or bottling or
That's
Kegging, anything like that?
okay. So I sent you a picture of my newest big piece. I don't know if we want to talk about that now, but I can talk about this little guy, which I need to remember to put this back when
Is
I
that a
am done with
spunding
this.
valve?
Yes, it is. This is a spunding
Excellent.
valve. And maybe I can tell you that this is something that like I've put into my brewing more within the last year or two after doing some reading about, well, German lager, especially Helles, but German lager in general, and then also low oxygen brewing, low dough,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't totally adhere to, but past fermentation, I've taken some steps, and this is one of the things. So if you don't know what a spunding valve is basically you can ferment under pressure, and this little guy will, you can set it to whatever pressure you want, and if the fermentation's going, it's not going to build up pressure in your fermenter until it explodes. It's going to let it out to gradually over to whatever level you want. So there's a couple things going on there, but that's one cool little piece of equipment that I use that I.
Is that a home build spunding
No,
valve?
this is a Blickman valve, and they
Okay.
actually have. I actually had to ask Brand Brand over at Brewers. Gosh, I'm getting text messages for some reason. How to get from this thing, which is a really slick Blickman thing, down to this, which is obviously a gas connect for a ball lock keg. But anyway, from this part up, it's all Blickman, and this part down, it's all like homebrew stuff. So yeah, it's really nice. And I have some other cheaper spunding valves, but this one's nice because you can take it apart if anything gets in there, which often does. Like beer will come out when it's not supposed to come out, and I'm like, oh my god, I have to take the whole thing apart and sanitize it. Which this thing you can do that. So that's why I like this guy and not the cheaper ones that I own.
All right. So that's a unit that you can pick up. Does that and you talked about it being able to be cleaned and all of that. That sounds cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that's important.
does it save you money like long term, like in terms of your CO2 usage? Like what have you seen with it?
Oh gosh, that's not even, no, that's not really even the point. Like, in fact, the processes that I probably could talk about, as far as like, I mentioned the low dough or the low oxygen brewing. That has a lot to do with hot side aeration, which a lot of people who've done research on beer point out there's no like evidence, or not in a homebrew scale does that make a difference. If you're going to concentrate on oxygen exposure, it should be after fermentation towards packaging. I think even Charlie Bamforth was on one of these boss get-togethers talking about that very thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of not worried about the hot side aeration part of it, but after fermentation, this is one of the steps that you can do to limit oxygen exposure. In fact, if you want to show some of the pictures that I sent you, this might be a chance to talk about what I'll talk about. One of the things that I did was I got a fermentation vessel that I can ferment under pressure, which I have done, and I typically don't ferment under pressure for the first few days. I actually have found it to be a pain in the butt because when you push that beer to the keg and it's already carbonated somewhat, it's a mess. So in your keg, it's coming out of the blow off, and it's coming out of the gas line, and it's coming through your spunding valve, which is a pain in the butt. So I have been actually um, go to one of the other pictures there. If you can see the one that shows my fermenter, I've been just using the fermenter as like no pressure at all. And then the nice thing about this fermenter, there you go, that is a PET plastic fermenter, which you can buy. Anvil is Blickman's kind of consumer, well, lower price company, and I think they bought these fermenters from a company called Kegworks. But this is a fermenter that's about 7 gallons, and you can see this is what I was doing last night. I'm in this case, that beer is mostly fermented, but still got like some ways to go. So I'm just using CO2 to push that beer into the keg. So at this point, there's no oxygen in the fermenter. And I should also say, speaking of saving money on CO2, that's totally not the goal, because that keg I filled with sanitizer completely, and then completely emptied it with CO2. So there's no, I mean, I've taken a step at least to make sure the only gas that's in that keg is CO2 at some expense, because of course you're paying for that gas, which I just did today at Airgas. So that is like not exactly a cost saving, but it is taking a step to make sure there's not as much oxygen in that keg as you would otherwise have. My old system was you just like rack in and you put some like saran wrap on the top, and as much as you purge that keg that way, you're not going to get, you're going to always have a mixture of gas in there, which is some oxygen and some CO2. Hopefully this is more CO2, although I realize it's not 100%. So the next thing is, so the beer goes into the keg with some fermentation to go. So if you go to the hydrometer reading, I hope this beer comes out 4 points lower than this. So it's going into the keg with some fermenting to go, and then go to the next one. I am not shy about putting yeast in the keg, because at this point I want some yeast activity in my spunding valve to go to work. So the idea is the yeast will continue to ferment, and it will gobble up hopefully any trace amount of oxygen that's in the keg. And the spunding valve allows that to not explode, basically. And at this point, I'm fine with building up some natural carbonation, because that's actually kind of nice for the beer. So, I mean, that's what I do. And if I was going to give some advice to any brewers out there who who are looking for a way to improve, like maybe consider how much oxygen you're taking up during your packaging. And like I said, there's yeast in my keg, and that's why my beer that came back from the picnic yesterday, is like, first pour is a murky mess, because there's a good amount of yeast in there, but that's by design. I'm fine with that, because it's a small amount of yeast. It's going to help me scrounge out the oxygen that's in there, and then it'll sit at the bottom fine until I'm done with that keg. I've never had any problems with, I could hear people saying autolysis, but I've never had that problem. So, and plus at that point, it's going to be very cold in the bottom of your keezer. So I think yeast activity is much lower at that point.
All right.
Well, you want to talk about this beer? This is the Helles. It doesn't look very good right now. Like I said, it's came back from the picnic a little undercarbed and a little bit murkier than I should have been. It could have been some yeast in suspension, but I've yammered on about German lagers, but the Helles is like the standard, normal, regular beer. And from that, you can go stronger, you can go weaker, you can go darker. If you can, like, my thinking is, if I can like dial in my process on the Helles, I can apply that to a lot of other things. So if you look on German brewing kind of forums online, they talk about the Helles is like like if you can dial in your stuff on the Helles, then you can apply that to a lot of other things. So I brewed a Pilsner yesterday, German Pils. It's really not that different than the Helles. It's just more bitter, more hoppy maybe. And then I also make a Leicht beer, which is like a light or diet beer version of a Helles. And that's just like a Helles, but less grain, less alcohol, less calories. A Helles Bock would just be the Helles, but higher alcohol, higher gravity. So from a Helles, you go a lot of different places. You start to see the relationship. I start to wonder, am I just making the same beer over and over? Because what's the difference between a Kolsch and a Helles and a Pilsner? Well, it's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But those are all beers that I like to drink. So I don't mind having a yellow fizzy beer on tap at all times at my house, because that's the beer I want to go drink. If I had a crazy like a key lime pie Kolsch, I don't think I would be dying to have that beer when I got home at the end of a hard work day.
I get it. So I mean,
sorry to bash on key lime pie Kolsch's.
Somebody out there's making them, and I'm sure they're good. I'm sure they're
awesome. Just not my thing.
Yeah, and I would still have one.
Oh yeah,
I'd have a 4 ounce pour or an 8 ounce pour.
Yeah,
They'd give me. I'd have one.
Oh yeah, which
Just to
for
say I
sure.
tried it.
5 gallons of it though. That's a
Five
lot
gallons is
to
a different
handle.
animal.
Yeah.
That's, yep, I agree. I 100% agree. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that'd be another question I'd want to ask you then before we retire here, and that would be like, what is your take on that? Like you were talking about the different styles that you like to brew, and you have your Kolsch, you have your Helles, you have your pills, and then you probably have the Maibach, and then a
Of
like
course.
a Fest beer, probably like all gold
Sure.
yellow fizzy, right?
Yeah.
And you've brewed all of those, haven't you? I mean, the light
Oh
beer
yeah.
too. And so I mean, like, is it for you like all the same general base recipe? I mean, it's a lot of similar technique, you
I
know.
mean, it really is a lot of similarities. I mean, I will look at recipe. I'm not one for like I'm not super creative as far as putting together like a recipe that nobody else has ever done. I will look in some books, a couple books that I really trust. I will look up like in Zymergy they publish those award-winning beers. I'll look at those and take maybe an idea here and there. But yeah, there's just subtle differences. But I mean, there's some things that are important about those differences. Like if you're gonna do Helles, it's important to decide what your balance of Pilsner malt to everything else is. If it's all Pilsner, I mean, there's a little bit of acid malt in there. Some of us use Carahel, but you can also change up and do a more of a robust country style by adding more Vienna or Munich. In fact, after drinking this Helles, I wish I kind of want to go try that version of the Helles recipe again. I mean, there's things you can play with. The last Kolsch I made, it's not very good. I decided to do some not dry hopping, but late hopping. That's out of character for that style. So I was thinking, well, I'm not going to enter a competition, but let's see what this tastes like. Uh, I wish it was better. It didn't turn out very good, but at least I got to try it. So I might take a certain recipe, traditional, and then go, I'm going to do this even though it's out of style. And I don't care. I'm just going to try a Kolsch that's a little bit hoppier. Sometimes that works out. Sometimes it does not.
Well, amen to that.
Oh, and there's
Um,
one more picture I sent you, if you don't mind. Speaking of like, if you are able to do that, I was brewing for a long time on some really nice Blickman pots, Boilermaker pots. Uh, Actually, I bought them from a club member. Oh, there we go.
Say this
And
is what I got.
recently, a couple years ago, during the pandemic, actually, I ordered this guy. This is the Anvil Foundry. It's a 10-gallon all-in-one system. And it is kind of marketed towards maybe less experienced brewers, but man, it's really good. And I'll tell you the thing that it's good, the great thing about it is it automatic temperature control, whereas my system was propane and there was no control except for me, like jumping up, turning on the burner, and then I sit back down. And by the time I sit down, I have to turn off the burner because my temperatures are going like this constantly. And it
Mhm.
made for a really tiring brew day. This at least will automatically do the temperature control. So it'll kick on if it needs to kick on. It'll keep the mash at a certain point. And it's pretty inexpensive. I mean, it's not the high quality thick stainless that I'm used to with the Blickman products, but I mean, it simplifies my brew day quite a bit. You lose efficiency. You're basically doing like a Bruna bag type of setup where you pull the whole grain basket out and it drips out, and that's Bruna bag. So you're losing efficiency, but I mean, it's a really good thing. I wish that had been available a couple years ago when I bought my top tier setup, which is a very big bulky piece of metal that's in my garage now, and it would have made my life a lot easier. So, and I've made some beers that have done well on that thing. So, I mean, if I was worried that I'm brewing on like intermediate level equipment and I want to make advanced level beers, that is not a problem because you can make really good beer on that. And just like you can learn by going to our club meetings, there's guys brewing great beer on doing like extract and doing partial mash and doing all sorts of different ways. You can still make great beer no matter what equipment you have. You just have to
Yeah.
dial it in for your equipment.
Yep. You have you got three you have three tiers to that, right? You have your recipe is one part, you have the brewer himself or herself, and then that last piece is their gear. Like that system is the third part, and all three work together to make the beer. And
Yeah, and if you know how your system works, then you can do a lot. I mean,
mhm.
you do a
And
lot.
if you know how to manipulate systems in general, you can transition recipes. The brewer can transition recipes from one system to the next and still make great beer along the way, and you wouldn't know what system they brewed it on. You're one of
Right.
those guys.
And
You're
thing,
totally one of those guys.
and the thing I liked about the thing is, whereas most of us, our systems are like we've built our systems like piece by piece, and we figured out problems and puzzles along the way. This was kind of refreshing that it came as a thing, and like as an experienced brewer, I go like, well, I'm not using that pump; it's wimpy, and I'm not using that chiller, that's wimpy. I'm going to sub out this and that. And my only concern was looking on the internet, the forums online, where these people were buying this and were inexperienced brewers, and they were having all these problems. Like, well, no, you just do that. That's an easy fix if you've already done this 100 times. It doesn't matter if you have a $500 all-in-one or $3,000 blah blah blah. You just that's going to leak, so you fix it with this, and you're done. You're not going to complain about it on an internet forum. You just know what to do because you've done it 100 times. So I was a little skeptical based on some of the things I saw, and it's like, no, this does what it's supposed to do, and it's good. So I'd recommend it if anybody's ever thinking about it. It's not a big outlay of money. It's pretty inexpensive.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to call it. This has been your Brewer Spotlight. Again, thanks, Bill, for taking the time talking to me.
Thanks for having me, man.
Hey,
Appreciate it.
Least we can do, man. And again, thanks for your years of support here with the club as well. So
thank you.
Definitely enjoy seeing you at future meetings.
I'll be seeing you.
All right. Cheers all.